Um, okay, well, I'll start. So this is the Alexander Hamilton, the site of the Alexander Hamilton Custom House. So New York,
I can't see you.
settled by the Dutch first. In 1624, they bought the island of Manhattan from the Lenape Indians for 36 guilders. And that was maybe a pretty good deal, the best real estate deal ever. And they called it New Amsterdam because they were Dutch and they were from Amsterdam. And so they had a custom house. This is not the original custom house. This is the site of the custom house. But they had this custom house, and they were not too good with the Indians. They cheated them out of a lot of property, and you know, they were not good to them. And so as the years went by in 1664, the British came to the island of Manhattan. Manhattan means island of many hills. And they decided they wanted it. And so they went to the Dutch and they said, we're going to take your island. And are you going to go to war and fight us? Or are you just going to be peaceable about it? And the Dutch were outnumbered, so they agreed that they would just peacefully let the British have it. So the British renamed the island of Manhattan, as I said, the island of many hills. There are a lot of hills in Manhattan. And they called it, and by the way, that's an Indian name, the Lenape Indians, not East Indians, like from India. They want to be called Native Americans now. Anyway, so they did that, and they peacefully took over from the Dutch, and they renamed the island of Manhattan New York after the Duke of York, who is a relative of King George III. And so this is where they had Alexander Hamilton's custom house on this site. It's now the Museum of the American Indian, and it's a Smithsonian museum, and it's got all kinds of artifacts in it, and you know, related to Native Americans, which they now like to be called. Although I did hear some of them on television the other day, and they said they're Indians. I don't know. So anyway, it was built, this building is a very beautiful building, and you can see there are statues, 4 statues in front of it. And these are representing the 4 continents. And it was built, it was designed by an architect named Cass Gilbert. He was a very well-known architect around the turn of the last century. It was built in 1902. And Cass Gilbert was an architect who only had 1 year of architecture school, but he kind of learned by doing, and he got a job with a very famous architect named Stanford White. And he learned by working for Stanford White how to build these beautiful buildings. So if you went here today, you would see a lot of very beautiful things in there related to the Native Americans. And here's a very interesting park that's right in front of the building where we just saw the Museum of the American Indian. And this is called Bowling Green Park. And they actually used to do lawn bowling there back in the 1700s. And they had an outdoor market there too. And they sold pigs and chickens and things like that, as well as fruits and vegetables. And if you wanted to stall in the Bowling Green Market, you had to pay 36 peppercorns rent. That's how they did it. Now, where you see that fountain in the middle, that's a statue of that was a statue of King George III. And he was the King of England. And for, you know, many years, England ruled the US. And, but George Washington and his friends didn't much care for it because they were being taxed, but they couldn't vote and they didn't have any representation. It was a monarchy. So about in 1776, George Washington and his friends read the Declaration of Independence a few blocks up from here. And then they ran down and they pulled down the statue of King George III, which was located where that fountain is. And on the fence around the whole area, there were little crowns representing the monarchy. And so they pulled those down and they cut them off and they melted them down and made bullets to kill the British. So it's an interesting fact. This is the World Trade Center. This is one World Trade Center. And as you know, we'll see some pictures later of that on September 11th, 2001, there were two towers that were hit by planes and destroyed. And so this is the new tower that they have built to replace one of the buildings. And it's called One World Trade Center. Originally it was called the Freedom Tower, but then they got rid of the architect who designed it and they replaced him with a different architect who was American. The other one was German. His name was Daniel Libeskind. And this American architect who designed this building is named David Childs. And they do have a very beautiful observatory on the top floor. And with the spire that you see there, it is 1,776 feet tall, representing the day that America declared independence from the British. And now, this is an interesting bridge. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. And this was built in 1883. And the original designer was a German immigrant named John Roebling. And he won the contract over many other people who were trying to get the job. And he was so happy because he was a German immigrant, and he had done some other bridges in other parts of the country, but this design was very unique. It had steel cables holding up the bridge, and in the river underneath it, he had secured the base of the bridge with these enormous caissons, which were like these big cement blocks that were going to be in the bottom of the river. Two of them. There's going to be one tower here and one in Brooklyn, which you can't see in this picture, but I don't think you can see it. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, you can't see the other tower, but he did do that. And so, unfortunately, after winning this very sought-after contract, John Roebling was down there inspecting the dock one day, and a ferry ran into him and crushed his foot, and he got tetanus. And he refused to go to a doctor, and he died a week later. And he never got to build the Brooklyn Bridge. But he had a son named Washington Roebling, and he was also an engineer. So Washington Roebling said, oh, never mind, I'll do it. And I know how to do it, and I have my father's plan, so I'll go ahead and do it. So Washington Roebling went down into those caissons I told you that are buried in the river. And he didn't realize there was a disease called Caisson's disease. He came up too quickly and he got Caisson's disease, which is a disease where nitrogen bubbles form in your blood, and he became completely paralyzed. He could not do anything. And he was a young man in his 30s, confined to his bed after that. And so of course, his competitor said, oh, he's disabled, he can't do it anymore. But Washington had a wife, a 30-year-old woman named Emily Roebling, who just given birth to a baby the year before. She said, no, I can do it, I'll step in. So Emily Roebling stepped into the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. And for over 11 years, she supervised over 700 men from, Irish, African-American, Italians, and they had to listen to her. And she got it done. And so in 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened. And Emily Roebling was the first person to ride across the Brooklyn Bridge in a carriage, even before the President of the United States, Chester A. Arthur, who was there for the opening. But Emily went first. And but people were skeptical. They thought, well, it was built by a woman, it's a strange design, they're not going to trust it. And so then P.T. Barnum, you might have heard of him, he was a showman. He had a circus and things like that at Emporium. He marched a herd of elephants across it to show people it was safe. And so people then were reassured, and it connects Brooklyn, which is the city in the distance, with Manhattan for the first time, so people didn't have to take ferries to get back and forth. And this is something interesting. Near the site of the Bowling Green Park, they have what we call the Canyon of Heroes, and they have plaques to anyone who's ever had a ticker tape parade. And they say they're going to have one for the workers of the pandemic when it's all over. But the last one was a women's soccer team, but they have just the whole sidewalk on Broadway is covered with these plaques of anybody who's been honored with a ticker tape parade. So ticker tape is something that they used to have on Wall Street, where they would get the stock quotes. But now, of course, it's all digital. And so they buy confetti and throw it out when the heroes come through. This is an interesting building. This is Castle Clinton, and it's in Lower Manhattan, not too far from where we saw the Museum of the American Indian. And it was built as a fort to defend New York Harbor from the British in the War of 1812. And you can see there are little windows there, and that's where they were going to put their cannons. And so this is an area called Battery Park because they had a battery of cannons. But unfortunately, or fortunately, the British never came. So it was used for a lot of other things, like an aquarium, a music hall, a circus, an immigration center. And today it's where you buy tickets to the Statue of Liberty. We might see some more pictures of it. There's an overhead view of it, and you can see the Statue of Liberty out there in the distance, which is on an island. And the Statue of Liberty, just to say a little bit about it, was a gift to the island of Manhattan from France, because they were ruled by monarchs at the time, and they wanted something that would symbolize liberty and justice for all. And so a guy named Pierre Auguste Bertoldi, he was a sculptor, he designed it. And then a man named Frederick Eiffel, who you might have heard of, he made the Eiffel Tower. He designed the interior structure so it could keep on standing. And for years they toured parts of the statue around different areas of the world trying to raise money. Finally, they got enough. In 1886, it was mounted, and it's been there ever since. They recently opened a brand new museum on Liberty Island that's just fabulous. And this is Federal Hall. And this is where George Washington took the oath of office. It's actually the second federal hall. The original one burned down, but it is a sculpture made by John Quincy Adams Ward, who was a descendant of the second president, John Adams. And behind there in Federal Hall is a museum, and that's where they have George Washington's Bible that he took the oath of office on. And this is a sketch of George Washington's second White House, which he lived in for less than a year. It was on Broadway, and it was near the Museum of the American Indian. But he soon moved down to Washington. This is a memorial pool that they made 2 memorial pools on the site of the buildings that were hit by the bombers in the planes. And so the relatives didn't want them to build another building right on top of the sites because they couldn't get all the remains out. Over 3,000 people were killed that day. So they came up with this idea of this this memorial pool, and the names of the victims are engraved around on plaques around the sides. Ah, this is the grave of Alexander Hamilton, not the one who was a Baba lover, although you don't know, but he was a best friend of George Washington, and he was also the first Secretary of the Treasury. He was a guy who instituted a lot of the financial policies of our government. He was also the guy who started the New York Post and the Coast Guard, and he was from the Caribbean. So, you know, there's a Broadway show about him. So if you are interested, I'm going to do a little bit of a rap about his life, which is from the Broadway show. And he was, by the way, he was illegitimate. He was an orphan by the age of 12. His father deserted his mother, and then she died. And so he was taken in by some Jewish businessman, and they recognized that he was brilliant. And so they took up a collection and sent him to college in the US. So here's a little bit of the rap about him from the Broadway show. How did a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, improvidence and scholar, grow up to be a hero and a scholar, the $10 founding father without a father, got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a self-starter, by being a lot smarter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter. And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the sea, he struggled to keep his guard up. But inside he longed for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter. Then a hurricane came and desolation reigned. Our man saw his fortune dripping down the drain, put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. Well, the word got around. They said, this kid is insane, man. Take up a collection, send him to the mainland, get an education. Don't forget from where you came, man. The world's gonna know your name. What's his name? Alexander Hamilton. So that's a little bit about him. Unfortunately, Alexander Hamilton was shot in a duel by a man named Aaron Burr. They were mortal enemies, and they had been enemies for years. It began with a bad water deal, and then when Jefferson was president, elected president, the third president of the US, Hamilton, there was a tie between Jefferson and Burr, and Hamilton supported Jefferson. So he was elected president, and Burr was kicked to the curb, made vice president. He didn't like that much. He blamed Hamilton. So the final straw in their bad blood came when Hamilton wrote a letter to the newspaper describing Aaron Burr as despicable. And Burr demanded a retraction, and Hamilton wouldn't give it. So he challenged Hamilton to a duel. And they went over to Weehawken, New Jersey. And Hamilton, as was the custom, fired a warning shot. That's the way it was supposed to be done. Burr did not fire a warning shot. He shot Hamilton in the stomach, and he was taken back to New York by boat, and he died the next day. And there was a public outcry, and they demanded that Aaron Burr be arrested for killing their beloved Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. But New York said, well, he was shot in New Jersey. We can't prosecute him. So, and then New Jersey said, well, he died in New York. We can't prosecute him. So he was never prosecuted. So he was a bit of a pariah the rest of his life, though. But this is Alexander Hamilton's grave. And we don't see here, but next to it's the grave of a man named Robert Fulton, who invented the steamship. There's another view of Castle Clinton, which I spoke about earlier. And this is our city hall. And this was built in 1812. It's in the federal style. It's by a man named Joseph Mangan. And it is the site of George Washington's reading of the Declaration of Independence. But it wasn't built then, because the Declaration of Independence was read in 1776. This wasn't built until 1812. So it was just, farmland at that time. And Alexander Hamilton and his friends used to have drill practice here. Oh, this is interesting. This is the New York Stock Exchange. This is the place in 1929 where they had that horrible stock market crash, and people were jumping out of the windows and, committing suicide because they lost everything. And this is when the British left New York, and this was called Evacuation Day when they left. This is a very long-term governor of New Amsterdam. He was a guy named Peter Stuyvesant. He was a bit of a racist and a penny pincher, but as a result of his being in power for so long, a lot of Dutch names are given to things in New York, like Brooklyn is a Dutch name, and there are a lot of things named Stuyvesant in New York. And there's also the Bowery, which is a place where a lot of bums used to lie in the gutter. And that's the Dutch word for farm. This is St. Paul's Chapel, and it's the oldest continually operating building in New York City. And it was built in 1776. And George Washington used to worship here. And they have a special pew in there for him. And it's right behind where the 9/11 incident, tragedy happened. And so it became a triage area for 9/11 workers. And so they have a little chapel in there with memorabilia from that time. But the miraculous thing about this building is that even though it was right behind the World Trade Center when it was hit, nothing happened to this building except one tree fell in the yard. Whereas a brand new Marriott hotel that had just opened right next door to it was almost completely destroyed. So people say this church is divinely protected. There's another church. This is Trinity Church, but it's not as old as the other church that we just saw. This church was built in 1846. There were two other Trinity churches. The first one burned in the Great Fire of 1776. The British tried to burn down New York City because they didn't want us to win the war. That was part of the Revolutionary War. Then they built another one, but the roof collapsed in a snowstorm. And this is the third one, as I said, which was built in 1846. And it's been visited. It's very gorgeous. It's an Episcopal church. And it's connected to the last church, St. Paul's Chapel. That was kind of like for the workmen, but this is the more upscale version. And Queen Elizabeth visited here. And as I said, Alexander Hamilton is buried here. This is the Woolworth building. This is a very beautiful building built by a man who started a store selling things for 5 and 10 cents. And he became a multimillionaire selling things so cheaply. And it has gold mosaic ceilings with pictures of him, and the architect, the same guy who designed the Museum of the American Indian, Cass Gilbert. And recently they're turning the top floors into condos that are, you know, billions of dollars. So this is a picture of the 9/11 tragedy. And the first plane hit at 8:56, and it hit the 77th floor, and anybody above that was trapped. And the second one, 9:03, and we never thought that they would collapse, but they did, because they weren't built in such a way to withstand this kind of attack. And I actually was making a commercial in Giant Stadium in New Jersey at the time, and we were trapped there till midnight, and we never made the commercial. We just sat there and watched the whole thing on TV, but I saw the second tower fall. And here's, you know, a designer image of what it's going to look like eventually. It's still not all completely done, but that's the plan. And this is Zuccotti Park, and this is where the Occupy Wall Street people were, were camped out for months until Mayor Bloomberg finally got rid of them. But I think they left on their own because it got really cold, but they were protesting the policies of Wall Street. And I don't know if they really did anything to change things, but a friend of mine had a booth there, and she was giving people hugs free, but they cost $10. So let's see, I don't know what happened to this. Might be the end of it. I just want to check something. Yeah, I guess that is the end. So I want to thank you all for coming today. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, thanks, Tina. I do have one simple question. I don't know if it is simple, but I was trying to know the difference between a church, a chapel, and cathedral.
Yeah, well, I think it's the size. Like St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is in a different part of New York, is, you know, huge. It's the largest Roman Catholic church in the US. Trinity Church is bigger than St. Paul's Chapel because it's just a matter of size, I think. Any other questions?
Not from me, but it's nice. I mean, great to know about all that great work done by the people, and we are we're still using the Brooklyn Bridge, and it still functions.
I like that it was built by a woman, because
I know that's wonderful.
she wasn't really an engineer, but she because women weren't allowed to be engineers in those times, but she studied and she read her husband's books and he helped her. And she did a fantastic job. And it's still standing here today.
So I wanted to ask a question. Do people give tours or companies give tours of New York? I heard that you were a tour guide.
Yeah, that's a big thing. But of course, now with the pandemic, it's not happening. But I am a member of the Guides Association. There are all kinds of, those double-decker tour buses and things. So, hopefully we'll be able to do that someday soon.
Are there river tours also?
Well, there's, yes, the Circle Line goes around Manhattan. And there's also another boat that goes to West Point if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
And isn't there also a boat that goes around the Statue of Liberty?
That too, yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
There are boats that go to the Statue of Liberty, then Ellis Island, which is an immigration museum, and it's very interesting. And, back to Lower Manhattan. There's another boat that goes to an island called Governor's Island, which was given to the city back in around 2000 for $1. And it was a former military base, but for the officers. So it has these beautiful homes there, really lovely. And they've turned them into art galleries and, performance spaces. And they have all kinds of things going on over there in normal times.
Mm.
And then, of course, the Staten Island Ferry, which goes back and forth every 20 minutes now between New York and Staten Island. You can see the Statue of Liberty from the Staten Island Ferry. But if you buy a ticket on a boat that's specifically for the Statue of Liberty, you can get off and you can take pictures. And as I said, there's this wonderful new museum that just opened up.
Mm.
Do you know, Tina, if people can go up the Statue of Liberty? I mean, maybe not in these days, but in general?
Yeah, you can go up. There's a pedestal ticket, and then I think a special ticket for the crown, but not these days. And it's quite involved because you have to go through security to get on the Statue of Liberty boat, just like the airport.
Really?
Yeah, and then if you want to go inside the statue, you have to go through security again. And you have to put everything you have with you in a locker and lock it up. Because people have tried, unfortunately, to blow it up and stuff. So they don't want any problems.
Wow.
It's high security.
Yeah.
But somebody read a poem the other day written by Emma Lazarus. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I lift my lamp beside your golden door. That poem is on the base of the statue.
Mm-hmm.
It had been forgotten. She was a young woman, and she won the contest for the Statue of Liberty poem. And but she died very young, and she never got to see the statue. She never got to see her poem mounted, and it kind of lost for years. And then someone found it in a bookstore, and recently, within later years, was put on the statue.
Uh-huh. Well, this has been so nice. I really, really appreciate this tour. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and there are so many other areas of New York that are fascinating that I maybe work up other tours of, like the theater district and park and so forth.
Okay.
Hey, Tina, one more question.
Yes.
Why did you decide to call this particular presentation you have Alexander Hamilton something?
at Lower Manhattan because Alexander Hamilton is very famous now because of being a Broadway star and having that musical. And the musical, you know, I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's recently gone on the Disney Channel. And I did send Soleja a link to it. I don't know if you got it.
You did? No, I didn't get it. I'll check with her.
I sent it to her.
Oh, I'll watch it then.
Yes, and maybe your boys would like to see it. Anyway, the concept of Alexander Hamilton was, it's a Broadway musical, and there's a lot of rap in it, and they have non-traditional castings. So they have a black man playing George Washington, and a Hispanic man playing Alexander Hamilton, and a black guy playing Aaron Burr. These people were not black. And they were not Hispanic. Some people say Hamilton might have been Hispanic because he's from the Caribbean, but there's never been any evidence of that. And so, you know, I learned the rap because I thought, okay, non-traditional casting, why not a white woman as Alexander Hamilton?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's interesting. Thank you.
Anything else? No?
No, that was so nice. Thank you so much. I came late, but I really enjoyed what I saw. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. There's tons of history.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if I were there in person, I would be showing more, but that's a little bird's eye view of it.
Did you do tours with the bus? Were you the?
I have done bus tours, but I don't do those. I don't like, well, I was meeting cruise ships, but I didn't work as a guide on one of those city tour buses that go for 12 hours because I don't like being exposed to the elements. They're open on top.
Yeah.
It could like rain, or it could be very, very hot.
Oh.
So yeah, I just do more of the walking tours or the bus tours with the cruise ships, but I don't know if they'll be doing those anymore because of problems with cruise ships.
Do you live in New York?
I do. Where do you live?
North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll work up another tour of some of the other areas that are interesting.
That would be great. This has
Yeah.
been so much fun.
You
Okay.
can-
Well,
Yeah. Your favorite places in New York?
well, of course, I love the theater district, but it's been shut down by the virus.
But you like it, so that would be fun.
Yeah, Times Square, the theater district, it's very vibrant area.
Uh-huh.
I love all the shows. You know, I saw most of the Broadway shows, and I'm just sad now we don't have them. Does anyone have a question in chat? Let's see. Jim and I are going to the store. Oh,